let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream here on Red Hat Live Streaming. I am Andrew Sullivan, your host, and I am joined, as always, by my lovely and effervescent co-host. I don't know, my brain's not here today, Johnny. I'm so sorry.
I understand.
Johnny Rickard. How are you, sir?
I'm good, sir. Happy Wednesday.
Yeah, it's we were just chatting a minute ago in Slack. We're both kind of discombobulated today. It's like normally on stream days, like the morning, I block off my whole morning, and it gives me time to focus and collect my thoughts and organize everything and all that other stuff. And today it's been just packed with meetings. And normally I can blow off those meetings, but like today for some reason it's been nope. You have to be there. You cannot skip these meetings. So
That's right. Business is good.
yeah. It's a beautiful day at Red Hat, right?
Always.
But I'm not overly concerned about that because our guests today are two awesome gentlemen. So we are joined by Chandler Wilkerson, who is a part of the OpenShift Virtualization Integration team, as well as John Herr, who they're both on the OpenShift Virtualization Integration team. We're going to talk about some really interesting things today. Hopefully, see some really interesting things with regard to, as we said in the kind of pithy title, right? We're going to see how to make virtual machines play nice and do some really cool tricks inside of Kubernetes, inside of OpenShift. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time playing with and experimenting with and just testing out OpenShift virtualization because I just think it's really, really cool to be able to put VMs into OpenShift, right? So yeah. All right. So I forgot. I almost forgot. John, Chandler, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, I'll start with John.
Hello, I'm John Herr. I'm a senior software engineer at Red Hat. Been working with OpenShift for several years now. What we do is our little team, we integrate different products and different technologies as best we can to show how to better use the product and all the great features of it.
You're being very modest, John, because you and your team are responsible for quite a few blog posts over on the cloud.redhat.com blog for just showing different things, how they work together, how can we do this dance, if you will.
Yeah, and we actually have some demo videos we post on the Red Hat OpenShift channel. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I should dig up there's a playlist specific to OpenShift virtualization that we should dig up here on the OpenShift YouTube channel so that way we can share that out with everybody.
I will see if I can find it really quick.
Yeah. And then Chandler, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah. As you say, my name's Chandler Wilkerson. I've also been working with Red Hat and OpenShift for a number of years. Most recently in the OpenShift virtualization, and just kind of spending the last couple of years doing blogs and videos on kind of bringing different parts of the whole Red Hat portfolio to bear on where they have integrations that are useful for the virtualization group. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have a big engineering org that does all the actual hard stuff in virtualization. So we just take that nice, puzzle piece and then try to fit it in, with a little bit of oomph into the other pieces of the portfolio, just to make sure that everything works nicely. And we tell people how easy it is.
Yeah, I find your team to be really interesting because, like, my official title, used to be technical marketing manager, right? And you talk to Christian, one of the other hosts for, he's the host or one of the hosts for the GitOps Guide to the Galaxy, right? Most of the hosts, Jafar, et cetera, we're all technical marketing managers. So we sit in the BU, alongside product management and product marketing and kind of do exactly what you described, which is, we take the technical aspects, we make flashy demos, and we map it over into, business value. But you all sit in engineering and have this like, completely different view of the world, which to me is really awesome, because you have that kind of direct line into, so how is this supposed to work? And I really want to showcase this, and I want to make this, I'm going to keep using dancing analogies for some reason today.
Let's do it.
I don't know, how do I make this tap dance the way that you all intend it to? And to me, that's really, really cool. All right, Marifet, OpenShift Virtualization or Red Hat OpenStack, especially for telco workloads? Oh, that's an interesting question. Johnny, we can talk about that briefly before we get to the top of mind topics. So I can tell you Andrew's opinion here. I think it depends on your long-term strategy of, are you moving from VNFs, virtualized network functions, to CNFs, containerized network functions? So with a VNF, if everything that you're doing is VNFs, there's no, goal, there's no plan to move to CNFs, then, OpenStack certainly makes a lot of sense. Even if it's, I think, a small number of CNFs, OpenStack probably still makes sense, because you can deploy OpenShift into OpenStack. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have customers doing that all of the time. But if your goal is to be, more CNF oriented, if you want to use all of the other benefits, or I should say benefits, because they're both very capable platforms that have pros and cons. So it's not necessarily OpenShift versus OpenStack, but it's, if you want one feature set or one set of capabilities, Kubernetes oriented, OpenShift oriented versus, OpenStack, then that certainly makes sense. I will say that OpenStack, it's 10 plus years old. When did OpenStack come out? 2011?
A while, yeah.
2011. And it's always been in the telco space. So there is that heritage, there is that deep expertise, trust in what it's doing. Whereas OpenShift and OpenShift Virtualization for VNFs, it's a little bit newer from I will say, from a manageability perspective. The core technology, as I'm sure John and Chandler can point out, it's the same. It's KVM. So the hypervisor is going to be exactly the same. It's just the things around it, how you manage it, how you interact with it, that are going to be a little bit different. So any thoughts, John, Chandler, Johnny?
Yeah,
for
I was
me,
going to say. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to wait it out, made it awkward. I'm sorry. Yeah. So for me, it's about the workload that you're going to put on it, right? Like if that should really be the driver behind it all. If you're if you're using the cloud or you're using OpenStack already, and it's something that's familiar to you, and you're not trying to, I mean, I guess you could be using it for long persistent things, but it really comes down to the workload, in my opinion. Like if just make that decision based off of that.
Right. I was going to point out also there's kind of a migration aspect to this as well. So you have a number of groups that are looking to bring the microservice architecture into their edge offerings and into the 5G network kind of space and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes all your development work is into the latest version of the product, but you also have to carry the older standards as well. Bringing those across as virtual machines using OpenShift Virtualization is a viable path.
All right. So, Marfet, I see your message there. So hopefully we answered your question. If not, please feel free to keep asking there in chat. You can also reach out to us, social media. I'm at Practical Andrew on Twitter, on Reddit, on all the places. Johnny is at jrocktx1. Or you can reach out via email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. I don't mind at all. So I'm gonna, Mike and Mario and a few others. Let's delay till after the top of mind topics, and then we'll dive into those questions. So for anybody else who happens to be watching us or listening to us, I will put out a reminder that this is one of our office hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming, which means that we're here to answer your questions, kind of regardless of whatever they may be about, although we generally try and keep it OpenShift focused, as you would expect. So don't hesitate to ask any questions, anything that's on your mind. We'll do our best to answer those. If we don't have the answer, and Johnny is brilliant, but he doesn't know all the answers, we're happy to reach out to the appropriate folks inside of Red Hat, whether that's product management or engineering or whoever that happens to be. And then we'll follow up with those questions at either the next stream or maybe in the blog post that we put out after each one of these streams. So let's see. Let's talk about some top of mind topics, Johnny.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I think you had a couple in here. Istio.
Yeah, so a couple days ago, I think it might have been Monday, Google announced that they're going to donate Istio to the CNCF, which, to be honest with you, I thought it had already been done, but I was kind of shocked to hear that Istio wasn't part of CNCF. But yeah, so it donated the project, so it should be going through like the incubation process and stuff like that. So it's a pretty big deal for Istio, which is it's awesome that Google released it, and it's going to be awesome for the community.
Agreed. I had the same exact thought of, what do you mean Istio isn't already a part of the CNCF? I'm not a service mesh person, so that was interesting to me. Yeah, and I will use that to also touch on OpenShift Virtualization, or I should say the upstream for OpenShift. Or KubeVirt is also, I think it's an incubator project now with CNCF.
Yes, it just recently got granted.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, moving up in the world, right? Becoming an official CNCF project and all that, or getting closer to becoming a full-on CNCF project, which is awesome. Moving down our list here, a couple of upcoming things. So Summit is happening May 10th and 11th. So for anybody who isn't familiar with Summit, this year it will be a hybrid event. So there will be some number of folks on site in, I think it's Boston, right, Johnny?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, but the vast majority of folks will be virtual. So, for example, I will be attending virtually. I won't be there on site. So I would definitely recommend and keep an eye out on the cloud.redhat.com blog. I think that they are planning on posting an OpenShift specific list of information that's happening at Summit. So if you only care about OpenShift things, right, cloud.redhat.com/blog, there'll be a blog post there that says, hey, here's OpenShift things at Summit, which leads me into my next one, which is, where did my window go? They have already published the blog post for KubeCon. So I'm going to share my window here because I happen to have the blog post up. So KubeCon EMEA happening in Valencia, Spain, you can see is the week after Summit, the 16th through 20th of May. So they went ahead and published this blog post. I'm going to push this into our chat here so that, Stephanie is already on top of it. Thank you, Stephanie. So if we look through this, there's a huge list of Red Hat related, OpenShift related sessions that are happening at KubeCon. Honestly, I was extremely surprised at this. I was expecting like a dozen different things listed here. You can see there's like 30. So lots of stuff going on here. So you can see KubeCon itself kicks off on Wednesday, but I know that we have several day 0, day -1 events that are happening. So OpenShift Commons, which you can see is called out here. There's also GitOps Con. There's also, what's the other one? There's at least one more that's happening as well. So lots of stuff that's going on. When I registered for KubeCon the other day, I saw like OpenShift Commons was free to register. So there's always lots of stuff that's happening there. I think they're going to be reviewing the roadmap and some other things at Commons. I haven't looked at the full list of sessions that's happening there either. But just an FYI for our audience, those 2 weeks, in order to not compete with your attention for either Summit or for KubeCon, we will not be streaming those weeks. So next week we will be streaming. We have the Migration Toolkit folks joining us. So Marco Berube and names are hard today. See, I know. This is what happens when I don't get my thoughts organized beforehand. But anyways, the Migration Toolkit folks will be joining us. We'll be talking about Migration Toolkit for containers, moving from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4, moving between OpenShift versions using the Migration Toolkit. So as Stephanie so helpfully put on the screen there just now, please do subscribe to the channel so that way you can be alerted whenever we do go back onto the air. So next week, Migration Toolkit, 2 weeks off, and then we come back and I don't think we've identified what we're going to talk about yet because we have 3 or 4 different candidates right now.
And next week's gonna be a good episode. It's an interesting topic and definitely like the right time for it, you know.
Uh-oh, Johnny, you turned into a robot on us.
No.
Yeah, I think what you said there is it's the right topic at the right time, which is in case you didn't know, or if anybody is still on OpenShift 3, remember that this year, I believe it's July, is when OpenShift 3 moves into the last stage of its life cycle. So now's the time to be very seriously investigating and earnestly pursuing moving off of OpenShift 3 if you still happen to be on it. All right, just real quickly here, I've got 2 other things to talk about. So first and foremost, if you are, or if you were affected by or were paying attention, we talked about a potential etcd, where did my thing go? A data inconsistency issue with OpenShift 4.9 and 4.10. So effectively, this was an issue found in etcd version 3.5.0 through 3.5.2. This was the reason that upgrades between OpenShift 4.8 and OpenShift 4.9 were blocked for a while. So that has been rectified as of OpenShift version 4.9.28, which you can see is the current version in stable, and 4.10.9 in 4.10. So upgrades are unblocked, are now available from 4.8 to 4.9. They were never blocked in 4.9 to 4.10, but all of that being said, I would definitely recommend that everyone update to either 4.9 or 4.9.28 or 4.9.10 if you're in one of these channels, right? So 4.8, if you're not already intending on updating, that's fine. But if you're in 4.9, something before 4.9.28 or 4.10, something before 4.10.9, please do update, because this is where the mitigations for that issue is addressed. So if we look down here, in the BZ, potential etcd inconsistent revision and data occurs. So they added in some additional checks. Where did my thing go? So they added in some additional checks in those versions to prevent that from happening. The eventual fix, which is to update the etcd version to 4.5 or 4.3. Gosh, I keep clicking around in tabs and look what happens to me. 4.5.3 is coming eventually, but short term, please update to those latest Z streams inside of the 4.9 and 4.10 channels to protect against that. All right, last one real quick. So if you, and we have had this come up a few times internally, if you are interested in moving your VMware virtual machines hosting an OpenShift cluster between data stores, there's a couple of things that you want to be aware of. So this KCS, and let me post it into here so Stephanie can post it. So this KCS kind of walks through some of the things that you need to be aware of, some of the process that you want to follow. So this usually comes up, wholesale migrating a cluster between data stores when folks are decommissioning a data store inside of inside of vSphere. So there's some things to be aware of, mostly with regard to the the compute, or I said compute because I'm reading compute on the screen. The control plane, and ensuring that there are no issues with etcd and etcd latency, and 2, with PVCs. Moving the PVCs, reintroducing them, or doing a migration, PVC to PVC migration using the migration toolkit. So the KCS walks through all of that stuff. It's a great read if you happen to need to do that. But if you just want to expand, grow your existing OpenShift cluster into new data stores or into new DRS clusters, you can do that as well, just using machine sets. All right, that is it's all I've got for the top of mind stuff. So I'll turn off my screen share here, and then let's talk a few questions here, Johnny. I think you've been tracking them here, so.
Yeah, so if we start at the top, I don't know if I'm still digitized. Hope I'm better.
Nope, you're still a robot. It's all right. We'll get it sorted out. Let's see. I'm scrolling back in chat here so I can address some of our questions. So Mike Murphy, on episode 65, it was mentioned that resource requests are resources being held by the scheduler. What would the scheduler be holding those resources for? So essentially, the scheduler doesn't know and doesn't really care what it's holding them for. It's just what the pod has in its request. So basically, whoever created the pod definition, presumably a human, has said, this pod, I want to ensure that it has 1 CPU worth of resources or 1 gigabyte of RAM, whatever it happens to be. And the scheduler just says, yes, I got it. I'm going to make sure that there are that many resources. It's not a true reservation, but available to it when I schedule it to a particular node. So it's really an arbitrary thing determined by the pod definition and whoever created it. And I'll John or Chandler, while Johnny's sorting out his robotness. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. You're welcome to weigh in if you'd like.
Well, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I came from a high performance computing background, so definitely you see that with like job schedulers in the HPC cluster, where you want to make sure like some jobs may spend like 3 hours with a tiny RAM requirement, but then at the very end put everything together and then spike up to something huge. And just knowing that workflow in advance and asking for the right numbers so that you're that the job doesn't get killed by the scheduler for exceeding its requirements. You have to kind of space that out. And so there's not really an easy way to say, well, I know this one is spiky and, we want to avoid like them all spiking at the same time. So you just kind of have to give ceilings.
Yep. Yeah. It's funny you say spike like that. I way back when I had a developer who they were writing Python scripts, and apparently the story that they told me was the DBA was mean to them and wouldn't give them a database, so they just decided to serialize everything onto disk. As basically take a dictionary and serialize it. So anytime this application would fire up, every time they had to reload it, you would see this massive spike in disk utilization and memory utilization as they read this like 4 gigabyte dictionary off of disk. It was, yeah. So that was a fun one. But that was back in the early 2010s, back before containers were what they were today. So yeah, developers sometimes do some wonky things. Mario, OpenShift Virtualization as an alternative to VMware. So we get that question quite a bit from what I understand. And I can tell you Andrew's perspective, and that is OpenShift Virtualization and VMware vSphere they're similar, and they have similar capabilities in that they're both hypervisor platforms. They're both capable of hosting, pretty much any virtualized workload that you would like. The difference is, in particular, how you plan on managing and consuming those virtual machines. So the kind of core and important thing to remember about OpenShift Virtualization is it is first, foremost, and inseparably a part of OpenShift. So if you don't intend to use OpenShift for all of the things that OpenShift does without virtualization, then it's really not the best fit, right? You have a lot of features, a lot of complexity, a lot of things that you're paying for that you might not might just get in the way. In addition to that, it's also a dramatically different experience. I was a VMware admin for a long time. It took me a little bit to wrap my head around these concepts and map them into the concept of a data store or a storage domain and Rev terminology into VM disks are now stored in PVCs, and there is no monolithic data store, or things like storage demotion aren't a reality, or storage live migration aren't a thing as a result. So there's other things like high availability is handled differently. It's handled in the Kubernetes way, not in the way you would expect with something like VMware. So you really have to understand the requirements of your applications, irrespective of virtual machine and hypervisor platform, to really be able to make a decision on that. So I'll let the experts weigh in here. John, Chandler, if you have any thoughts.
So yeah, so the way the virtual machines start is there's actually a pod tied to them. So when you start a virtual machine, there's actually a pod gets generated that gives you a lot of the control and access into the virtual machine. So it is not similar to, it is a different experience, as you said, Andrew. So those are things to keep in mind. Not always as straightforward as you would think.
That's something that kind of blew my mind when I first started digging into OpenShift virtualization. We're putting VMs in containers, and then we're basically managing that container through the pod paradigm, just like any other container. and that just, it's one of those like, but wait, we put pods or containers in VMs, not VMs in containers, right? And so that was really interesting to me. I don't know if there's anything more that you want to or can say about that, but
I don't know if Chandler, do you have anything you?
Just kind of an amusing thing that some people have kind of gone in like, okay, well, how far can we take that inception? And so you get the pod in the container, and the pod in the container, and in the VM, and go on down. And I think we have seen some attempts to install OpenShift on VMs in OpenShift virtualization, and however far down you can take that. Of course, at some point you're virtualizing the hardware. You're not doing hardware virtualization anymore. You're having to emulate. So it's a toy.
That's a thing, right? Because and I'm trying to look at it in the background here. One of our folks, Arvin, he wrote a blog post. I'm trying to find it here in the background of like using OpenShift virtualization to deploy basically child OpenShift clusters. So you're putting Kubernetes in Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes VMs on, Kubernetes effectively. And to your point of this, inception type of thing, now I'm putting, containers and pods on containers and pods running on the physical server. And everything that I've seen and heard, and I've talked with him about the customer that's doing that, they're very happy with it. It performs exactly the way that they expect it to, and does all the things that they want it to. It's just today, I think the integration isn't there. It's a non-integrated install, so there's no CSI provisioner for the underlying physical cluster type of thing.
Yeah, there was a topic in this year's KubeVirt Summit, which was in February, on doing basically Kubernetes on KubeVirt and that kind of setup. So I know it's something people are definitely looking at. And at first you kind of look at it and think like, well, why are you just doing it in order to say that you can do it and then move on? Or sometimes you actually find that there are people who are using this for tenancy and really want to make it something workable.
Yeah, I still remember going to it was KubeCon in Seattle and listening to the Ludse guys, which is a German service provider. I think they were using KubeVirt to create virtual worker nodes to then join back into the parent cluster, so that they could basically increase pod density and stuff like that, as well as provide isolation for their customers, for their tenants. I thought that was really cool, a way to carve up the massive servers that they had in order to, address a lot of the, the Kubernetes scaling issues that they were encountering. But that was, 2018, 2019, I think was when it was in Seattle, something like that. I only remember that. I remember that session. I only remember it was in Seattle because my wife came out at the end of the conference, and we got to tourist around Seattle, which I don't usually do when I travel. See, Mario, I see that Stephanie has put up your question here. Is an alternative to move workloads from VMware while preparing the apps to be cloud native and use OpenShift? Is that a good path to follow? I would say yes, potentially. One of the things that's interesting to me is you can use with OpenShift virtualization. Remember, as John said, the VMs are in pods, so you can use them like pods, and I think that's one of the things that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. So things like you can, if it's connected to the SDN, you can use a service to connect other pods to that virtual machine. You can expose that virtual machine via a route, it's you have that ability to interact with them. And then in theory, when you take the application inside of that virtual machine and move it out into a container, it's no longer virtualized, it's just containerized, and put it into a non-VM pod, a regular pod. There's no change from the way that the other things that are interacting with it are talking to it, right? It's just one day it's in a VM, the next day it's a pod. So I do think that is a valid use case, right? Of we plan to modernize, we want to do it on our times, on our agenda, on our time scale. and that's one way to get you there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been working on. So, some of our workload kind of goes at the previous release. So 4.10 is out, obviously, and so our kind of like, due by 4.11 release workflow for our team is all 4.10 stuff, and so part of that is service mesh, and so we had the service mesh team on like a number of weeks ago that. And so I started looking into how to add a VM into a service mesh. And so I'm kind of in the middle of that blog post, getting that all done. But the default kind of toy app that they use for, demonstrating service mesh stuff is this book info thing where it has like 3 or 4 microservices, and you go into this page and it says there are a couple of books, and then these books have ratings and these books have reviews, and each one of those things is a microservice. And so I was able to set up one of their toy microservices on a VM and kind of set it up so that the whole service mesh should work with, pointing at the VM as opposed to the microservice. And so you can play with that. So, the general idea is, okay, you just forklift a VM straight into your microshift phase, into your OpenShift kind of microservices architecture application, and you can concentrate on whatever piece of it makes the most sense for you, while letting those other pieces of the application run in VMs until you get around to kind of upgrading them as well. And so that's the workflow I'll be trying to show in that blog.
I'm looking forward to that one. And that'll be on cloud.redhat.com, right? // blog. Okay. We'll include a link to that. We'll bring it up in the top of mind once I see that one published. So feel free to ping me internally once you get that one out. Because to me, that's really cool, right? We had Ortwin on a few weeks ago to talk about service mesh and all of the stuff that's there. And again, going back to that, yes, it's a VM, but I can treat it, I can interact with it, I can get the same sort of behavior out of that VM as I do any other pod. Although I should caveat, it still keeps VM principles, right? It still does live migration and stuff like that.
Right. Another interesting thing is if you go and like edit a deployment, right? And you say, okay, well, I want to change the image in the deployment. Well, it'll happily go in the back end, kill the pods, and then fire up new pods, or start to fire up new pods, then kill the pod and switch over. VM, it'll just kind of sit there and say, well, it's a VM. I'm not going to touch that for you. I'm not going to delete, shut down your VM. Mm-hmm. You got to do that part. So there is a little bit of difference there.
Yeah. So you can, it basically, yes, it's a VM in a container, but it doesn't get treated like other containers when it comes to
as opposed to a deployment, a VM has a few more rights, I would say.
Got it. Interesting. That I know I've seen that behavior in my lab when I do things like cordon and drain a node. It live migrates those VMs instead of terminating them like it does all the other pods. So it's interesting to see that it has that behavior with other things as well.
And one thing to note is if you are running VMs and you go into your virtual machine and you decide to shut it down, it's going to get restarted automatically because it's tied to a pod. So it will actually restart the virtual machine. So very important to have your guest FS tools installed and you shut it down from within, OpenShift, and then it'll do a graceful shutdown and then power it off for you.
So. That's interesting because OpenShift Kubernetes doesn't know that it was a graceful or a proper termination of that VM process. So it just says, oh no, the process terminated. And then it goes and restarts it. That's hilarious.
But there is tooling to make sure that the behavior works as you intended. It's just the default behavior is always run. And so if you kind of clone one of our template VMs and set it up, and then you think, okay, well, I'll just shut down the VM here and we'll be fine. It'll just pop it back up and won't even kill the pod. Like it'll just come back up.
That's really interesting.
But there
Yeah.
are states for like there's one is like end on success, or I forget exactly the terminology, but if you look through the set of states that you can define, you can say basically, if this one shuts down politely, then leave it down. If it crashes, restart it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that talks to the question that we had earlier about, is OpenShift virtualization an alternative to VMware? It's just different behavior that, as an administrator, if you're not used to it, if you're not prepared for that, it can be unexpected behavior that may not get you what you want. So thank you, Stephanie, for popping up another question from KMX. Can we integrate OpenShift virtualization with a fiber channel SAN? And Rev, I have a big storage domain. So I think the answer here is yes, but it's going to be different than you would expect. So there's no storage domains, right? The traditional virtualization, we have this, massive 1, 2, 5, 10, 50 terabyte storage domain, and we dump, dozens, hundreds, thousands of virtual machine disks onto that. And then that single storage device is mounted across all of the hypervisor nodes. With OpenShift virtualization, instead, we put one VM disk per PVC, which would be a LUN coming from each one of those is mapped to a single LUN coming off of the storage device.
Yeah.
So I think Fiber Channel is a supported storage protocol for OpenShift. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't used Fiber Channel in a decade, which was before Kubernetes. So I assuming it's a supported storage protocol, and assuming that your storage provider has a CSI provisioner, or your storage vendor has a CSI provisioner that works with your array, as far as I know, that should work fine, right? It's okay to say I don't know.
No. So my experience, I'll do that, is it just uses your underlying OpenShift storage. So if you got valid storage, it should work. You may run into some caveats every now and then, but depending on the CSI, right? So
yeah.
But yeah.
So I will say, this is definitely a question for next week's, I think, with the MTV group, because that's what they do. They figure out how to,
not music television, music,
right?
Migration toolkit,
migration
virtualization.
Toolkit, for virtualization. And so they're, I want my MTV, if anybody remembers that.
Instead of radio or TV killed the radio star, containers killed the virtual machine, maybe. I don't know. KMX, how to migrate my 600 VMs, 300 terabytes of storage from Rev to OpenShift. So yeah, that will be a good one for next week. We can talk with the migration toolkit folks about that. So they have, via the migration toolkit for virtualization, which is an operator included with OpenShift. If you go to the operator hub, you can search for it. It's in there. You can point it at your Rev environment and basically map, this storage domain maps to this storage class, this source network maps to this destination network, and select the VMs that you want to go and tell it. And I think it'll even do a warm type of cutover thing. So it'll leave the VM running as long as possible in the Rev environments and copy all of the data from, storage domain to PVC, and then turn off the VM, do the last copy, and then turn back on the VM. I think.
Right. I believe you're right about that. Kind of looking at the questions, I was thinking, well, the one piece that doesn't really, that's not obvious to me, is how you could get out of actually having to copy from SAN volume to SAN volume in a different format. And I think, maybe you're just going to have to bite the bullet on some of that 300 terabytes kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Let's see, rhope 9, VPA can sort out human errors. Yes, it can in many instances. Although it doesn't work with virtual machines, right? Vertical pod autoscaler?
I would assume it wouldn't, because changing the memory on the VM is a reboot kind of operation.
Got it. Johnny came from Bottville, Texas. Yeah.
Thank you, Lester.
Yeah. He is in Texas. So, Lewis, use case came to mind, consolidation of security policies around SSL TLS, certificate management, because of legacy workloads. Yeah, I would assume that would work. By consolidating everything into OpenShift, you can apply one set of policies. As far as I know, things like network policy also works. So if you're using things like ACS to manage communication between pods, between different things inside of OpenShift, that would apply to VMs just as well. It's just a VM and a pod, right? So it inherits all of those things. Are live migration seamless for OpenShift virtualization? Yes, it's yeah.
What's seamless?
But
they do live migrate. So
yeah. So when I dug into this, because I had the same question, which was, wait a minute, pods terminate, pods don't move, right? And the way that it works is effectively we schedule a second pod. So the VM in a pod is running on host A. We say, hey, I need to schedule a new pod, basically with the same characteristics. And the scheduler says, okay, I want the new pod on node D. And then I assume the operator, tells those two pods to talk to each other, and it uses the native QEMU KVM live migration mechanism at that point. So it moves the state from one to the other. So I think the requirement there is RWX storage for the PVCs, because it has to be mounted on both source and destination. Which some of you might say, like the person just a minute ago, right? But what about my fiber channel? What about my iSCSI block storage? Many, maybe most, I don't know, but many of the block storage vendors do support RWX PVCs with block mode PVCs. I specifically said block mode there, not file system mode, because block mode, it basically the host, the hypervisor, the OpenShift node, gets out of the way and just hands it over to the pod or to the container. And since it's QEMU libvirt, it manages access and keeps double access out of the way, I guess. Let's see, I guess not especially having VMs, pods, RWO PVCs. Yeah, Marafet, yeah. RWO PVCs would not enable live migration. It would have to be RWX. Mike Murphy, can you create an RDP session into a Windows Server VM running in a pod? Yes.
Yes. Our third guy, who's off in the chat answering this question also, Bill, has done that and is working on setting up some auto unattend XML for my GitOps demo that will turn that on automatically, so we can play with that more easily.
Very cool. Yeah, and this was something that I learned. So you can still connect your virtual machines directly to the outside world, right? You don't have to connect them to the SDN. You can, the concept of a virtual switch like we have in Rev or in VMware doesn't exist in OpenShift, but it's effectively a Linux bridge underneath the covers. Mm-hmm. And we just connect the VMs or the pod through Multis, which connects the VM directly to like a VLAN interface on the host.
Right. So you can use nm state to set all that up so that the VMs are directly on a completely outside controlled subnet and have their normal DHCP server and all that.
And you can connect them to both at the same time, right?
Right.
Correct. Yeah. And you might even get you used to, years ago, older versions of OpenShift, when I did that, you actually had a performance increase with using Multis on a separate interface. Now, whether you do that now or not, they may have actually, things have gotten a lot better now.
Interesting.
A lot different. So if you're looking for performance for your RDP sessions, it might be something to test in your environment to see how it performs.
Interesting. That'd be so you can, on my VM, I can effectively have two network adapters. Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm sure I can have way more than two, but one that's connected to the SDN that maybe the application uses to talk with other pods, and one that the administration team uses to RDP or connect and run Ansible playbooks or whatever against that virtual machine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's also SRIOV, and you can do PCI pass-through directly into a network adapter on the host. All these kind of options.
Going back to that BNF CNF conversation. Mm-hmm. Yep. And is it? I just had this conversation. I feel like I have this conversation with product management like every other day. GPUs, vGPU.
vGPUs, I think we're getting there, but GPU pass through PCI pass through definitely.
Yeah, that works.
Got it. So AI/ML workloads. I guess you could do a virtual desktop. There's no.
There's a use case people are exploring.
Yeah, there's.
Definitely.
I guess there's no brokers that work with OpenShift virtualization though. Like I don't
there's
know.
a guy who always shows up to the KubeVirt community meetings every Wednesday at about this time, who always asks or usually brings in like, okay, so I've got 1,000 node cluster with tens of thousands of VMs, and I'm trying to do RDP and all this, trying to set it up with all the GPU pass through, and basically he's running a VDI off of Kubernetes plus KubeVirt, and like, yeah, that's happening.
Wow, that that blows my mind.
At scale.
Yeah, wow. So I'm gonna have to think about that one, because in my home here in my house, like I use a Mac and it's an M1, so I keep Linux VMs, I keep Windows VMs that I just RDP into or I SSH into to do various other testing and stuff like that. So now I'm wondering if I could use something like OpenShift Virt to do that.
Yeah, somehow I'm guessing he's bought a bunch of like Mac Pros or something, because he does all three flavors, all three OSs.
That's really cool. Now I need to go.
Awesome.
Now I need to find the recordings for those since they happen about the same time as this stream. Let's see. I'm just reading through questions. So John Chandler, if there's something that you want to demo or something you want to specifically talk about, by all means. But if you want to just answer questions, we can do that as well.
I think I've done kind of the demonstrations often are like, I actually did a DevConf session with the KubeVirt GitOps kind of setup, but I'm actually okay, continuing on answering questions. This is a good conversation.
Yeah, I agree. It's I always love to know what our audience is interested in, and I'm always surprised as well. Every week, usually it's our Hope 9. I've seen him chime in a few times. He always asks the most difficult questions. Let's see, Mario. In case a worker goes down and there are containers and virtual machines, VMs are migrated to another worker or needs to be manual intervention. What kind of file system is needed to do that? So, Mario, is this a high availability situation, or is this a graceful maintenance type of situation? So I think from my testing in my lab, if I do like a cluster update where it does a cordon and drain of the nodes, it'll live migrate those. Mm-hmm. But if the node fails, then the VMs they're just another pod.
It will bring them up again, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would expect it to recover just like any other pod, right? It'll go through the scheduling process and just be put onto one of the hosts, right? And there's no file system there because technically, I mean, there is a file system, but it's not relevant because it would only be mounted by one at a time in that case.
Right. Yeah, that's the poor man's migration. Click off the node. Like, whoops.
Yeah, it's my migration. I assumed it was all CLI only for Windows VMs. Mike Murphy.
That's about the RDP question.
Yeah. So, and I don't think you even have to connect it to the external world to do that, right? You can RDP through like a node port, or I don't know if you can do routes.
You should be able to just like you'd expose anything else. Like if you want to expose SSH, which there's in the user interface, there's a nice little click button to expose SSH. There's not one there that I've seen for RDP, but you should be able to, just expose the route and connect straight into it.
That's cool. I didn't think RDP would work through a route. I guess you have to do like pass-through encryption or certificates.
Well, put it this way: I've not done it. I'm going with theoretically. We'll use theoretically. I would think it would work, but
I mean, I would think so too. You're not
These are
required
node
to use
ports, I
port.
think.
I would think pass-through. Pass-through would probably be the way to
pass
get in.
through. Yeah, because you don't have to use port 3389 for RDP.
Mm-mm.
No.
So I would think you can point, now I can't remember, the remote desktop client, MSTSC.
MSTSC.
Just registered for Summit. Thanks for the reminder. Yep. Summit, and Summit this year is, I think it's 2 parts. Last year it was 3 parts. This year it's 2 parts. There's the one in May. That's the in-person hybrid event. And then there will be some events, a distributed group of regional events that I think will also be in person from what I remember. So in more ways than you might think, due to Golang X509 requirements, don't forget that your cluster is 509 FIPS compliant when you stand it up. Johnny, do you have context on that from our Hope 9?
I can't see the question. When I had to drop out, I don't see it anymore. Oh wait, never mind. I'm lying. There it is. Oh, that's the 4.9. After 4.9's last release, the I think this is what he's talking about, where the X509, you can't use a CN anymore. It has to be all through like a SAN.
Oh yeah, you've brought that up a couple of times, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Christian, not sure if it was discussed. Is it recommended to have a specific set of nodes for virtualization? I don't think so. So long as they're physical nodes, I think that would be the only requirement.
Yeah, Peter answered this in the chat as well.
Okay. I know.
Yeah, we like bare metal nodes. Whichever way we can get them.
I'm running 15 minutes behind on the chat here. Christian's question was at 11:37 according to the timestamp here, and it's now 11:55. So
there's been a lot of good talk, though.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to get this or to let this run away.
Here from Australia, thank you, Mario. Although that is a ludicrously late hour to be up listening to us, but we do appreciate you joining us. Johnny, we've talked about it before. Maybe we should we should reinvigorate that conversation of occasionally, maybe once a quarter or something, doing one of these at an APAC friendly time. Just to help accommodate those folks, so that like Mario doesn't have to be up at 2 a.m. Is there a plan to add something besides VFIO driver asking for Mellanox network NICs? I don't know. I think Peter was in chat. He's the product manager, so he'd have to.
That would be a good question to ask in the upstream community to look in KubeVirt and see. Okay, well, does that require anything out of the ordinary to support?
Live migration with PCI pass-through. Which, do I remember hearing that we can do live migration with SRIOV? It's not quite the same, but
I'm not 100% sure if the live migration with PCI pass-through and SRIOV work. I should know this, but I don't.
And we can tee this one up for next week as well.
Yeah.
Since we're gonna have the migration team on.
Yeah, Johnny, thank you for keeping a list of those questions. I see you in the chat on the Restream private chat, keeping track of those. So, RHope 9 CRC now works on M1. So I did see that there is now M1 binaries in the thing, right? So let me share my window again. So I believe if we come in here, there should be. So yeah, there's. Oops. ARM64 clients in here. So I don't know if operator SDK. Let's go to clients and we'll go to CRC. Latest AMD. No, it seems like CRC is only AMD 64 on macOS. So yeah, that's something that I hope that we can get that. I know a lot of so Red Hat switched to giving employees M1 MacBooks. It hasn't been that long ago, like maybe 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect that with the proliferation of M1s internally, that will drive the priority of that up pretty significantly. I'm surprised we haven't done it externally, but there was a thing, and I always lose it. For a while, the x86 Mac OS CLI tools, OC and kubectl and all that other stuff, they would fault out on M1. And it was a Golang thing. And there was like a certain Golang flag that you had to set when executing it. And I find the blog posts like once every couple of months and always remember, oh yeah, that's really cool that actually works. And then I promptly forget about it. So I'll see if I can find that. Yeah. So I was a very early adopter for M1. And so it just didn't work at all for me. And it was one of those, like, I have like an x86, RHEL 8 VM that I just use. And that's my kind of bastion or my jump host for everything. So I just stopped thinking about it. And it turns out that there's been massive progress. Johnny, you were talking a couple of weeks ago about how Podman works on the M1 now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never taken the time to circle back and retry and relearn and actually do it correctly instead of just working around my problem. Christian, more awake. Yep. Are you Christian? Are you running to volunteering to run the 10 o'clock stream? Well, Christian is on the west coast of the U.S., so I'm okay to throw him under that bus.
Me too.
That was Stephanie, for anybody who hasn't heard her before. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, so I think we've caught up on chat here. So Chandler, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and seeing Christian's name and talking about Christian reminded me of this. You've been doing some work with GitOps and OpenShift Virtualization.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really interesting to me. So a VM with OpenShift Virtualization is a Kubernetes object, right? It's just YAML. You can go and do a OC get VM in the namespace and -o YAML, or you can browse in the GUI. It's just YAML. So that means that GitOps will work kind of out of the box, right?
Yeah, for the most part. There was actually a little bit of integration that I did as part of this to make sure that the Argo CD GUI actually understood what was going on. So GitOps isn't quite as simple as just saying there should be a manifest on the cluster, make it so. Why isn't that manifest there? Keep poking it until it happens. There's also kind of an understanding of, well, I put a manifest on the cluster and it takes a time to actually resolve or actually deploy. And so that's certainly something that you run into with data volumes, which are the kind of component chunks that wrap PVCs when you're doing virtualization, and with virtual machines and virtual machine instances, which are two separate Kubernetes objects. And so, if you just kind of had blindly, or like I did, throw all these things in and say, go make it so Argo CD, it will create the data volume, create the VM, and then expect them to work together while the VM's not coming up because the data volume isn't there yet. Like its root disk isn't available. And so there is a little bit of tooling that I added just in terms of Lua scripts, which was an interesting learning programming language exercise to basically say, like, is this manifest that I get back, in the status field, is my data volume there, progressing, in error? Where are we? And so feeding that back into Argo CD then gives it the ability to say, like, hey, this sync failed because my data volume's in error, or this sync is progressing because the data volume is progressing, and that kind of thing. And wait to put the second piece in before or until after things are completely loaded.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind? So you said data volume. And data volume was something new to me when I started with OpenShift Virtualization. And it comes from the containerized data importer.
Right.
So can you expand on that a little bit?
Okay. So I think a lot of what you can do with a data volume, you can do with PVC and annotations that then trigger CDI, the containerized data importer. But at least in OpenShift Virtualization, and obviously in the upstream KubeVirt, you have this concept of a data volume, which is a little bit more of a friendly handle for underlying PVCs. And so you can say, I want to create a data volume that will get its content once bound from a URL or from another data volume or another PVC. And so you basically can declare that, for instance, in OpenShift Virtualization, we have this concept of templates of VMs.
Mm-hmm.
And, the most recent kind of development was we started auto-populating those templates from official images. And so when you install OpenShift Virtualization 4.10 and beyond, you're getting like a RHEL 8 and a CentOS 8 and a Fedora 35 image ready to go. And it's actually downloading that image into the cluster as well. In order to populate your virtual machine's root disk, you make a clone of that kind of golden image, from back in the system imager kind of days, if people remember that idea.
So that whole data volume clone thing was what triggered me to do my last lab rehash, because I needed a CSI provisioner that could support cloning, right? And the way that I sort of figured out, or the way that I map it in my head, is the data volume or CDI, the data volume. It is what abstracts away the storage operations. So when you say create a new VM based off of this template, like you said, it's that template has a disk and it's stored in a persistent volume. And essentially we're saying clone that persistent volume. And the data volume construct is what either, if it's a CSI provisioner that supports it, it says, hey, go and clone this for me. And it's offloaded to the storage array. Or if the storage provisioner doesn't support cloning, then it'll do a host-based copy. So it abstracts all of that into one single set of operations from the user's perspective. But in reality, there's a lot of intelligence that goes into that to have it do the right thing.
Right, and not to mention snapshotting and snapshot restores, which was a really interesting concept when you're dealing with kind of virtual machines and pods, and with their root disks and PVCs, you want to take a snapshot. So there was an orchestration that they had to invent, basically, that would go in, tell the guest agent, all right, do an FS freeze,
right,
run the snapshot, unfreeze, just to make sure. And so I was recently tasked with a blog to kind of demonstrate that. Can't remember if it was a blog or a video, but at this point, basically demonstrating, yes, it works in Windows as you would expect it to. Look, you can see where in the Windows, I'm remembering now, it was a blog. There's a little bit of event log that you can kind of see where it actually goes into the volume copy shadow or volume shadow copy function, comes up and says, all right, stop writing. And that includes everything from SQL Server all the way down to the bare OS components. And so you can kind of make sure that that's working. But that mechanism, besides giving you a kind of like a live snapshot backup of a VM in case you want to restore to a previous point in time, also is used for doing those data volume clones if it's available in your underlying storage class.
So that's all right. Now my mind is boggling. It's boggled. So we can take snapshots of VMs, which rely on CSI snapshots of the volume, I think.
Yes.
Does it utilize the underlying libvirt QEMU snapshot? So is it
only if the underlying storage class doesn't support it. So for instance, we use in our lab we have a NetApp. And so we use the Trident driver, and Trident supports native NetApp snapshots. And so
that's
when
cool.
you take a snapshot in OpenShift, or even in OpenShift virtualization, you say, give me a VM snapshot. It goes all the way down to the NetApp and says, make a snapshot. And then, that happens like that. And it comes back and says, I did it.
And then if the driver doesn't support it, then it'll fall back to QEMU to do it.
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, that's rad.
Yeah, that's really cool. I did not realize that we had that level of integration. That's awesome. And it does it on it's done on a per disk basis too. So those snapshots happen like at the storage level on a per PVC, which is on a per VM disk instead of at the data store level. Going back to my days when, as a NetApp admin, as a VMware admin, right? NetApp had the offloaded snapshots, but it was done at like the entire storage device level. So using their plugin, it was one of those like, you can take a snapshot of specific VMs, but really it's taking a snapshot of the whole storage device, the whole volume. So yeah, that's really cool.
The cool part's the heritage and keeping up with like okay, this snap goes with this virtual machine's root disk, and this goes with this data disk, etc. Because back in the day with OpenStack, that was the big issue with snapshotting, is like you would lose some of that heritage and like the associations and stuff like that. So that's super awesome. That's exciting.
Yeah, there's also a new custom resource that gets added for OpenShift virtualization and upstream. I have to keep remembering, like, okay, it's not just OpenShift virtualization; it's also KubeVirt. But there's a VM snapshot object and a VM snapshot restore, perhaps, object that then ensures that you're keeping track of all the drives in the VM, because you may not just have one.
Right.
I see Stephanie just found the OpenShift virtualization playlist on YouTube there. Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, a couple of questions here. So Lester ran into this with ODF in one of our patterns. We needed to wait for ODF pods to be completely ready before we could run certain jobs. So Lester's on your team, right, Johnny?
Yeah. So what he's talking about is like before you can actually do anything else, right? ODF had to be completely deployed before you could do like some step object store user integration. And so the way we were doing is we had Ansible just going out and waiting, just polling the Nuba endpoint deployment and wait till it says, okay, I'm good to go. As soon as the status says that, gives a little fist bump, then we can move on.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff in my bash scripts that does that when I'm redeploying a cluster. It's like, okay.
So we got fancy. We went from bash to Ansible, which is still calling bash. So
Wait, doesn't the Kubernetes API have a thing like wait for condition
there is
like that?
Yeah.
If the condition is populated, yes.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and you track it down, but yeah, like we're essentially waiting on. That's what we're doing now. So we have a job that actually waits for the deployment, but the initial run at it was bash. Second run was Ansible, and now we're moving jobs, or using jobs rather.
RHope9, does OADP work as expected for VMs? Just checking. I think I remember hearing that OADP integration is tech preview with OpenShift virtualization.
Yeah, we have a blog post to do that this sequence, so it came out in 4.10.
Very cool. So yes, and one of the things that I learned about OADP is storage agnostic and backup provider agnostic, right? There's no what do they call it? There's no data mover associated with it, so it kind of abstracts away. I think regardless of whether it's a VM or a pod or an application, it abstracts away, here I need to back up my application components into one thing. I'm describing this really poorly. I'm sure if the OADP guys are listening, they're all cringing and like, they're going to be, I have everything silenced right now. They're sending me, rude messages. But it provides that abstraction. So it doesn't matter which storage vendor you're using. It doesn't matter which backup vendor you're using. It should work so long as they support that API endpoint. Don't mention that app. Our storage folks decided to rejig our Trident backends, removing the media types. What's the SSD, HDD, right? It's just a couple of letters. It's fine. It's
no big deal.
Yeah.
Extra space, unneeded.
Yeah. Yeah, can't mix storage classes. If you do, you need to go rustic. Yes, unfortunately, and you can't change storage classes for a PV or PVC. So that's something that the migration toolkit folks can address. I see that come up periodically. Again, kind of what I was talking about in the top of mind of, hey, we're decommissioning this storage array. We need to move all of these PVCs from one to the other. And today there's no, the most efficient way that I know of to do it is migration toolkit for containers. I, I can assume that well, I'll pick on NetApp again. So NetApp, I think they can move volumes transparently at the storage array level. So it's like Trident and OpenShift and whatever else consuming it doesn't know that it's moved. But I don't know if all storage arrays can do that or not. So it is 13 past the hour. I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time, not just here on the stream, but everybody who's watching. So we'll give it a couple more minutes. John, I wanted to ask you, you said before we started that you were doing some stuff with Windows. I wanted to ask about some things there, but we'll give just a couple more minutes. Anybody who has any questions, please feel free to submit those in. Clarifications, if we accidentally missed your question, anything like that, please do resubmit those. If we don't have a chance to get to your question today, or if we didn't answer it adequately or anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm super easy to get to, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. More than happy to answer those. I also have had a few people reach out to me on Twitter recently @PracticalAndrew. So please, that's you can of course send me a DM there if you would like, or Johnny and I are both on Reddit as well, same usernames as Twitter. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us in any of the various ways, and we're happy to help. Although I do apologize because for people who reach out to me on Twitter, there's usually a delay because I had to turn off like all of the alerts because it'll send me an email like every time somebody likes a post or does anything like that, which got way too noisy. So sometimes it can take a little bit for me to see that I have a message and respond to you, but nothing personal. Please don't take offense.
Popularity filtering.
No, not at all. It's just Twitter's just noisy, and the new ownership isn't helping. So
you can't blame him just yet. But
yeah. So yeah, John, I wanted to ask about Windows, and I think one, it's interesting, big picture, to see how much cooperation and togetherness between Microsoft and Red Hat there is these days, right? Azure, Red Hat, OpenShift, and Windows containers, Windows nodes as a part of OpenShift, all that other stuff. So Windows VMs in OpenShift virtualization. One, it's very much a thing, and two, I recently saw that when creating a new VM, you can add in a sysprep. You can do guest customization directly inside of the or from the interface there.
Yeah, and so I haven't worked on any Windows stuff in a while. We do have our Bill, who's in chat, working on some stuff, I believe, right now. And but yeah, you can do the sysprep. I think Chandler did some of that with his GitOps integration. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that it does support Windows. Windows will run inside OpenShift virtualization, which with some of the questions, others apparently know that, so that's great. So, but yeah, you can do syspreps, you can do several other cool things. There's a libguestfs utility that you can use against not only just Windows VMs, but your Linux VMs to sysprep your Linux VMs and such. And like I said, I'm not the one working on that. I just wanted to make it, visible that, it is supported. Windows is supported. There's tooling out there for it. Give it a try. And, as always, upstream community is a great place to give feedback, or to Red Hat, it's a great place to give feedback on things that you find missing or, desire.
Hey, John, so is it like pretty much any flavor of Windows, or is it like only modern flavors? Like, can we go back as far as Windows 7? I'm not even going to say XP, but like, can we go as far back as Windows 7, or is it pretty much like 8 to 10 and up kind of thing?
I tell you what, to be honest with you, I'd have to look on the product to see what's supported.
We go back pretty far.
Way back.
Sorry, we go back pretty far with Windows Server versions, like 2016 and beyond.
Okay. No, that's awesome. And then my next question is really low level, literally and technically, but like, when do you know if you can like interrupt the boot sequence on like a Windows machine to say like maybe hook up like a debugger or whatever and actually kind of like get into like a debug console through OpenShift virtualization? Because I know with like OpenStack it was really complex and almost impossible, but I'm just wondering if that's even a possibility within OpenShift Virt.
That's not actually something I know how to do on a Windows machine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's way beyond my Windows knowledge.
Okay, gotcha.
So yes, our Hope 9, I have run OpenBSD on OpenShift virtualization before.
I think it's, if I remember correctly,
I don't know about 7.1.
Yeah, the supported guest operating systems is inherited from Rev.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go and look up the KCS that has the specific versions. But it's limited to Windows Server, Windows Desktop, and I think RHEL as officially fully supported. But it's KVM, so like basically every operating system you can imagine will run. It's just not necessarily supported by Red Hat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. You're not going to get drivers and stuff like that for XP anymore, where VirtIO will work on Windows 7 possibly.
Yeah, Bill, Windows 7 is EOS and end of life. Yeah, yes, thankfully, although it is still frighteningly in use. And was it ever secure? Well, what's that saying about?
Point out though, Windows 11 isn't quite there yet because you got to get the trusted computing module in there, and so I think trying to get that as a boot source option in OpenShift virtualization isn't fully there yet, although people have demonstrated doing it in KubeVirt.
Right, I forgot about that. Yeah, you have to have the TPM and the secure boot stuff with Windows 11. Was it ever secure? Is any operating system secure? What's the thing about the only way to be secure is to never connect it to the network?
Right, buried in a concrete box and unplugged from all networks, including power.
All right, so I won't bore anyone with any more of my drivel. So thank you everyone for joining us today here on the stream. Again, if you have any questions, any other comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. More than happy to help however we can with that. Just remove the TPM from the config. I guess that'll work. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, next week we'll be talking with the Migration Toolkit folks. We've got already got a number of questions coming from this stream that we'll be addressing next week. So we look forward to having them join us. But I don't want to underplay and I can't thank you enough, John and Chandler, for joining us this week. This has been super informative. I've learned quite a bit about OpenShift virtualization, and now there's a bunch of stuff that I need to figure out when I'm going to have time to test it out. I've already rejiggered my home lab once or twice, and it sounds like it's time to do it again. So thank you so much for joining us. For our audience, again, thank you for joining us today. We will follow up with a blog post. That way we can link to a bunch of different resources. We'll link to all the various timestamps that we talked about things inside of here. And last but not least, thank you, Stephanie, for all your help in the background. So I'll hand it over to Johnny for last words.
Yeah, thanks again, Chandler and John. This is, super exciting, especially from the nerd. I'm getting triggered wanting to go do stuff now. This is pretty awesome. And then, to all the viewers, thanks for all the questions. This is what makes this exciting. So thank you very much. That's it for me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Mario, the blog post will be on cloud.redhat.com/cloud or /blog. Sorry.